The Great Wave was probably the earliest form of pop art at its time, and I think there were thousands of prints made when it was out, and people used it to decorate their homes, posters, but because people didn't have frames at the time, so a lot of them were lost. So only very, very few really nice and well-kept versions are left, and they're hanging in galleries, in very few galleries actually, might I add, around the world. And the British Museum only kind of put it up for display once every 4 or 5 years. We got to meet Sir Alfred Haft. I think he's the curator of Japanese art in the British Museum, and he is, I think, the voice of authority really when it comes to Hokusai. And we learned so much about it. So we went to visit Alfred when it was out, and they had this excellent exhibition on, and to see it in real life, and also to see that the colours they had were so close to the colours we have in the Lego palettes was a joy. And when I say the colours that they had, is because of course the versions they have hanging around, and the versions we see online are faded, right? The colours aren't as fresh, apart from the Prussian blue. But what the British Museum did was that they had recreated a version of their own, where they reimagined what the actual colours would have looked like in one of the early editions. And that was where we had our big ahas, like, why don't we create what it should look like fresh rather than as it looks now? And here we have the Great Wave, so we have fresher colours, and the colours lend itself very, very well to our Lego colour palettes. We really learned so much from studying the art of woodblock printing, so that we can take that into storytelling of, as you build it, you're realising that you're building in layers, right, as you would do with woodblock printing. And we initially had little frogs on there to kind of capture the foam of the waves as it broke. But after speaking to Alfred and understanding the love of nature that Hokusai had, he showed us like lots of different prints we had never seen before, and one of which was where there was like a wave, and as it crashed, in the background was a flock of birds that was flying out, and it was just like, it looked like sea spray, but it was actually a flock of birds. But also how, you know, this dialogue that nature has of each other, from sea to sky. And so we thought we had to bring that in to the sets and actually use birds instead of frogs. And I think it really added to the emotion of the set. It was really cool. I mean, like, everything from learning about the fishermen that were out to sea. Why were they there? And, you know, and working with Diego, our designer, our graphic designer, you know, to encapsulate the faces, you know, because it's still a Lego set at the same time, so we have a Lego DNA of creating it. And I think he did a really great job at capturing the emotion of that, and still kind of keep a kind of a tongue-in-cheek Lego humour to the piece. And Anna Mera, our designer for the set, she absolutely like knocked it out of the park with this set. I mean, we looked at like the original concept sketch that Nico Milan made, had like plates and layers and so on, and it was just brilliant. But when we kind of started to refine it, we were talking about how do we create the difference between the clouds in the background that mimics the shape of the wave, which is a classic Hokusai trait, apparently. So we had to keep the cloud in there. But when we did it in plates, we realised that it just kind of looked like another wave, you know, because they were both in the foreground. How do we create that? And she had this genius idea of like, why don't we use the mosaics? Because actually the mosaicing part created this kind of like visual diffusion that made it set into the background. So you had this really elegant sort of play of elements where you had solid plates in the foreground with the bird elements and the leaves and so on that created like the foreground. That's really coming at you, and that's really lifting the piece. And then in the background you had this kind of mosaic diffusion, this pixelation that was softening in the background, and it really looked like the clouds were more in the foreground, even though everything's more or less, millimeters apart, right? I thought that was a genius touch. It's everything we've been working towards, and it's finally out. So it's a joy to be able to finally talk about it, and that it's finally where we want. We want to be working with Lego art, to really break out of a certain box, and to kind of like really use as many different like building techniques as we can to tell the story of Hokusai, to tell the Great Wave, to tell the story of the Great Wave. So I think that's it's really a pleasure actually to be talking about it at this point, with the cartouche on the side with his signature and his and the title in the calligraphy. That was 100% true to Hokusai's calligraphic style. But do we then do it with the faces? And when we did it, it lost so much of the Lego DNA, and it didn't feel right. It felt ironically, it felt like it lost a sense of authenticity to what we're trying to create, because it is a relatively abstract version of the Great Wave. It's a Lego interpretation of the Great Wave, so we should do a Lego interpretation of the fishermen's heads in there. And we had quite a few different versions before we got to where we are now, where it's still not the two dots and the smile. that would also be quite fun. I think we did try it out. We kind of, after having a good belly laugh, we thought no, we should actually create some details in there as a nod and an homage to Hokusai. One of the things we wanted to do was that we really wanted to make sure the set comes to life. The waves really splash out and comes at you almost, and so we wanted to make sure that there was border that you may see that on the right hand side of the picture, one of the waves break out a bit and it comes out of the frame a little bit. It's a really nice, delicious touch that just hints at this being a dimensional piece. So it meant that we would need this kind of frame, a flat frame on the side, and before you get to the main edge of the frame. Then when we went to see the real thing, we realised that actually every time I look at it, from seeing posters to seeing the real art piece hanging on the wall, the real woodblock print, they also gave this wide border around and a really light wooden frame around it, and all of that is just to give it air. To breathe. And we were debating whether or not to use a black frame or the beige frame that we have on there. We settled for the beige because it is all about giving it air and life, and for it to breathe. It should feel fresh. It should feel almost like the sea spray, and can almost hear the birds, and that's the feeling we wanted to create. So that's why actually, because I understand normally we might give it a tighter frame and maybe even a black border, but I think this one it made sense once we saw the real thing that we should be true to the original. When I saw the reissue from the British Museum, when they had created a fresh version, a reimagined of what it would look like if it was fresh, I was like, oh my god, this looks like, just seeing it in flatter colours was this is perfect, and it looks so good. It's such a fresh take on a cultural icon actually, so it's nice to be able to do something different and to give it a fresh twist. Was good.